today of this 2 days research methods workshop. This is a special panel on where we have Professor Prabhu Mohapatra with us, eminent historian. We have Professor Rajni Palriwala, who is an eminent sociologist, and we have Professor Shivani. I'd just ask you to come join, and Professor Bhavneet, if you can also come, who will be moderating the session. Yeah, come. This is a special panel on research as an embodied practice, navigating the process of fieldwork. Just for our panelists and to give you a brief about what has already happened and how it's proceeding. So we have had, of these 2 days, the first day with 2 panels has happened. We had rather 2 different kinds of panels, not just in terms of thematics, but also one more focused on everyday travails of research methods while doing fieldwork. And the second one was more around the theoretical questions also related to the papers that were presented. This is a more general panel, which now I will hand over the mic to Bhavneet to take it forward. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am Bhavneet. I teach at the law school. I teach sociology in the law school. So yes, my life is challenging. And I am here to moderate this very fantastic panel. So I'm partly scared and nervous because of the brilliant scholars I have on this panel. To just give a brief about what this conference is trying to do. This conference is actually wants to focus on research methods, and it's not a conference where you come with your research findings. I mean, you can come and with your research findings and your analytical frameworks. But we are also sort of foregrounding that how did you arrive at these findings, or how did you, what was the process of your research method, what was the process of your research that led you to this, which is unlike a lot of other conferences where the focus is on the written article, the written text. So since the morning we focused on, as Professor Farhana Ibrahim, our keynote speaker, mentioned, that, you know, how do we capture that messiness of research that gets smoothed over in the final text, or whatever the final, quote unquote, the final text, right? Because there are such affective, visceral, emotional experiences in the field, whether that field is the archive or that field is somewhere far out there where you are immersed as an ethnographer. How do you capture that messiness, whether that is in the form of the language, because fieldwork throws colloquial vocabulary, but the text is in the form of one dominant language, or whether it is in the form of anxieties and vicissitudes of research that, you know, that routinely come up, and we've spoken in depth about the uncertainty of the field, the boundary of the field in the morning sessions. So with that, I wanted to sort of first introduce the 3 panelists and, you know, sort of foreground why the question of embodiment therefore becomes so crucial. Embodiment of research practices to encapsulate and to do justice to the messiness of research that is routinely obliterated from our discussions, right? So we have with us Dr. Professor Rajni Palriwala, who is a former professor of sociology at the University of Delhi, and also very, very lucky to say that also a former teacher of mine at the school. She has served as the head and Department of Sociology and the Dean Faculty of Social Sciences. She has been an NW visiting professor and a visiting fellow at Leiden University. And she was also the ICCR chair in Contemporary India at Sciences PO, Paris. Her research falls within the broad area of gender relations, covering care and emotion, citizenship and the welfare state, kinship and marriage, women and work, and cross-cultural and comparative studies of feminist politics. She has done fieldwork on a range of topics and fields, including a village in Rajasthan, in Leh Ladakh, in slums in Delhi, and in Leiden in the Netherlands. She is the author of a critical text published in 1994, Changing Kinship, Family and Gender Relations in South Asia, Processes, Trends and Issues. And she has also jointly co-authored multiple papers, book chapters, and books that for the sake of time, I'm going to leave out right now. We have with us Professor Prabhu Mohapatra, who's a former professor of history in DU. He has a fellowship at the National, he had a fellowship in the National Memorial Museum and Library, followed by postdoc appointments at Yale, SOAS, and the University of Amsterdam. He was a visiting fellow at the V.V. Giri National Labour Institute between 1998 to 2002, where he established the Integrated Labour History Research Program and set up a fully digital and online archive of Indian labour. From 2002, he was appointed the Associate Professor at the Department of History, he has held several positions at the University of, as visiting professor at University of Göttingen and University of Cambridge and Humboldt University. He's also been involved in the establishment of the Association of Indian Labour Historians, AILH. And at last, we have Dr. Shivani Kapoor, who is a political scientist who works on questions of caste, census, and labor from an interdisciplinary perspective. She's interested in understanding how the experience and reproduction of caste is mediated through the senses. Her work examines the olfactory experience of caste in the leather industry and attempts to decode the relationships between objects, pollution, and labor by tracing sensory exchanges and politics within the caste discourse. She's also interested in questions of representation, voice, and the formation of self and community identities through writing and its circulation, especially in the form of Dalit autobiographical literature in Hindi. Amongst other directions which her research follows, she's particularly invested in studying vocational and technical education in colonial and post-colonial India. Prior to join, she's right now at an associate professor at the Center for Studies of Development Studies at DU. Sorry, not DU, sorry. As a DU student, somehow you always... Yeah. But before that, she... Okay, but to the important point is also that Dr. Shivani Kapoor was an associate professor at Jindal University, so she's visiting us back, and she was a part of the Center for Writing Studies, which will hold a very important writing session tomorrow with our participants. So I wanted to ask one question with which we can begin. And you will, the panelists will get 15 to 20 minutes each. 15 minutes? That's a lot. 15 minutes?
Prabhu's saying that's a lot, he'll speak longer than that.
Okay. So 15 minutes plus minus, and so yeah, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. I just have a small question to sort of get going, that from your disciplinary and epistemic positions, which are and it's also a very interesting panel because we have a sociologist, a historian, and a political scientist. How do you interpret the idea of embodied research? And you can open it up to your interpretations and yeah. Rajni, would you want to go first? Yeah.
Thank you. Because I thought this might be the question from the write-up, and I always like to go prepared. As my students know, I always ask them why they've come unprepared for anything, and though I no longer have direct students, but still. So, from my disciplinary background, as you all will guess, I would speak about ethnographic research. And the first point about ethnographic research is always that it's microscopic, you're on the ground, it's concrete, and it's particular. You take what one would call a worm's eye view rather than a bird's eye view. So immediately you are in the mix when you are doing that work. It's about actual people in concrete and specific situations, human relationships, situations, locations. But if you're doing ethnographic research, and it becomes important before we can continue to think about the embodied practice, you of course have to get many worms and many worms' eyes views. And that of course requires that you are there physically in that microscopic, particular, specific, concrete context. This is also important because with ethnographic practice, there's often a tendency, and from what you've said, you see, Farhana might have pointed out to how that tendency is not possible. There's often a tendency to assume that you talk to a couple of people and it'll be okay, and you'll get, because then you'll get a clear picture, you'll get an easy picture. But in fact, with ethnographic research and with many worms' eyes, through which you would also try and look, you have people talking about the same situation, the same location, the same event, etc., in conflicting ways. And what I'm going to talk about in a certain sense is how do you deal with that? And also not only that actually maybe you get the most interesting insights if you're there where there are disputes, where there are conflicts, etc. Of course, doing research in a situation where conflict is overt or in a war zone is another matter entirely, and I'm not going to go into that. But that is, in terms of research practice, extremely difficult. Okay, now, what I do want to say as a few introductory remarks to this is because people assume that ethnographic research means, chalo, let's get into the field, we'll go there, we'll sit around, and everything will happen. But I think looking at all of you, you'll all have that experience now that good research requires a good research design. And in that good research design, one of the things you have to do is go beyond what I'm very tired of reading in proposals. You get this sort of methodology section, which is a cut and paste saying, I'm going to do quantitative, I'm going to do qualitative, I'm going to do a questionnaire, I'm going to do a pilot survey. And half the time it has nothing to do with what you say you're going to research, and it doesn't tell us anything about your method other than, okay, you managed to do a good cut and paste job. So, we all know to decide your methods, you need a research problem, you need good research questions, you need researchable questions, etc., etc. Okay, let's put that to the side. Amongst the most important parts of this is, of course, selecting your field site. Where will you do that ethnographic fieldwork through which you hope to address your research problem and your research questions? Now, this may appear self-evident. Field site in that geographical location, in that particular physical location. But that's one of the first things you learn in good research and fieldwork, you actually have to construct your field site. And the construction can take place through various processes. A lot of people I've seen, again, search, they select the research site and then they come to their research problem. That's also possible, as long as then there is actually a match you've gone through with it, and that your research questions then make sense. Of course, the opposite can happen. You've got research questions. On the basis of that, you select a research site, and then your research questions change. But let's leave that aside also. The point over here, which I'm wanting to make is, number one, that the strength of ethnography has always been that, yes, it's very located. Okay? Gupta and Ferguson, whom many of you may have read, sort of say that the great strength is that it's explicit and well-developed sense of location, that you're studying the here and now and not elsewhere. However, there is a problem, especially today, okay, in the contemporary. I've already said we can't think of the field site as just some geographical and physical location. Because in the contemporary world, we know increasingly it's difficult to get a stable location. The people whom you wish to talk to may be dispersed. They may not know each other, may not want to know each other. How then you, as a single body, are you going to be able to be there in that field and do that field work? That becomes one of the first questions which you then have to ask yourself. You have to carve out that field. There may be multiple locations. You may be studying a complex organization, an institution, a network of laboratories. Students have studied in their PhDs all these sorts of situations. And they have realized that they have to find ways to wend through them, to wend through meeting people at different points in them. So you get to multi-sited research, but not just multi-sited research, multi-stranded research, and not just multi-stranded research, you come to a complexity of methods. But if you're going to say, okay, complexity of methods, but it's ethnographic fieldwork, how do you get back to the concrete, the specific, the particular? Okay? Now, everyone, again, just says, in that cut and paste list, they will add, we're going to do participant observation. What is participant observation? What is ethnographic research? Okay. So the first thing which one gets is that for ethnographic research, as I've already said, there's a hybrid methodology, and you have to construct your field site, and you have to consciously and continuously construct it, and it is often through your continual presence in the field or in multiple fields. And I think, in terms of the archives also, this is something which would definitely emerge. You have to think through, whom am I going to talk to? What am I going to talk to them about? Who do I wish to talk to? All of these questions actually construct your field site. And that's when you realize then that it is not given already in advance. You will be guided in your field if you are there, if you are in conversations, which I will come to, by people saying, oh, you must talk to so-and-so, oh, you must go so-and-so. Sometimes places you don't want to go to, people you don't want to talk to because of, whether it's physical or mental discomfort. Those are the people who I think are actually creating this terrible situation. But I have to go and talk to them. That is the sort of situation I don't want to be in, but I want to go there. And it is through that continuing conversation in the field that you work out these places and these people. Now, clearly then, fieldwork requires an embodied presence. It requires a mental and committed presence. And I'll come back to this. One of my pet peeves is the journalist saying that they've got the story. We went in, we spent 5 days, 7 days, we talked to people, we've got all the facts, and now you just need to read it. We haven't put opinions there, we've just given the facts. Hello. As all of us know, our opinions may be there implicit. In the very way, who do we meet? Who do we talk to? But the most important thing for a good, whether it's a journalist or ethnographic fieldwork, is 2 or 3 things. You need sensitivity, and I'll come to what sort of sensitivity I mean. And you know that, in a sense, that what's a buzzword, what's the sort of portkey, rapport building. Now, in today's Zoom world and digital world, people will tell you how difficult it is to build that rapport. Even when you think even in the field, you may think you've built rapport and not built it, but how much more difficult it is if you are this disembodied, and I'm taking embodied very literally now, and I'm going to speak at a very basic level without going into the theoretical, philosophical, epistemological issues around here. But what is critical when we say rapport building is that in ethnographic fieldwork, and actually to some extent in most research based on primary data, the data is co-produced between you and your interlocutors. And that co-production will it happen depends on many things in terms of the process which you undertook during doing fieldwork. And the most important part of that process is what I have called the listening ear. Okay? And what that takes us to is, of course, the listening ear is hopefully good listening. This doesn't mean that you refuse to hear what hurts you or what's terrible, etc. But just the physical act of listening and what goes with it, there can be good listening and bad listening. And here's where I'm going to go into very basics, very specific things. See, if the data is co-produced, it means the researcher is also the research instrument. Okay? In ways more central than maybe with other forms of other methods and other research. What does this mean? First of all, you as the researcher have to be less and more than you are. Often one hears people saying, oh, but I'm not being authentic if I don't react to that person's opinions, which I don't like. Hello, you are not the story. Their story is to be your story. Okay? So the very way you are in the field will be decided by the field, not by your idea of who you want to be. What you will see, what you will hear, what you will smell, what you will taste, what you will wear, all of this comes together in terms of your good and bad listening. And I'm going to go into some of those sort of basics over there. We can break down good and bad listening into very simple bullet points, and I still have little time. First of all, and this is of course good not just for ethnographic fieldwork, but for listening to anybody and in any debate and in discussion, do not interrupt. Okay? And I think I have become very impatient with interruptions even in private conversations, partly because of all the ethnographic fieldwork one did. Why does one say do not interrupt? The interlocutors have to feel that you're interested in them. You have to give space for very long and meandering answers if you've asked a question, even if they seem, God, where are they going? You know, I asked them this and they are talking about that. They may take a long breath before they move on from one to the next. That patience of not interrupting, of listening, of hearing what they are saying. You do not put words into people's mouths, okay? You don't jump to conclusions. Very often in research, you can see at times when people have done that, because they're not able to pursue that question which should come, the line of thought which should come if those people actually had said those things which you've assumed they've said, okay? The interlocutors have to feel you're interested in them, okay? Then they are going to talk to you. That's the first step in rapport building. And that's the first sign of sensitivity also. Are you interested in who and what and where they are? Now, what the sensitivity also means is you probe. Yes, we all have to probe, but you don't push them to answer. And that is one thing, I mean, my own experience at times doing fieldwork jointly with somebody else who wasn't trained as an anthropologist, a historian actually, I had to whisper to her, okay, never mind, just, you know, don't push, he doesn't want to answer this. And we can come back to it again later, if at a later point. So probing without pushing, not interrupting, not jumping to conclusions, showing an interest, not correcting what you see, what you know, you think you know are wrong answers. The wrong answers can be a mine through which you will develop an understanding. And you have this sort of Cartesian point, you think, from where you can see everything which is happening, and so you know that this is wrong? No. There, nothing is wrong. Everything is a response and an answer which you take. We also continue to listen even if we don't understand without asking immediately for clarifications. Okay? Now, all these, you may say, okay, it's about the ear, it's about the words, it's how you hear them, how you note them down. It's about smells. And that's where, in a sense, the other parts become very important of this listening ear. You, middle-class people, whatever your status in society otherwise, often when you go into the field, not if you're going into a big organization, you are in a position of power, okay? Even if the people you are talking to are not the most oppressed or not the most marginalized. And often we go feeling nervous, especially our first round of field work. And one of the ways we often deal with insecurity and nervousness is to assert how we are superior. How we are higher education PhD students or post-PhD students and whatever. As soon as you start putting that social distance between you and them, in terms of your body language, in terms of the way you talk, you will be putting in barriers in what they will say to you, what you will hear. Okay? And sometimes these means very difficult things. There was a time when I would insist on drinking water wherever I was. Unfortunately, now I've decided that's no longer possible, so I do carry my water with me, but that was one of the ways in which initially one tried not to put social distance. And I remember it used to be particularly important because we know the caste-ridden society we are in. It used to be particularly important when I was going, say, in the village, I was going to the Balai Mohalla. And there in particular, I would sit and I would say, okay, yes, give me water. Or in urban slums in Delhi, where I knew working class and very often scheduled caste, I would take water. Now one finds a story whereby to go around it, and then you say, okay, give me tea, but I'll drink my own water. Unfortunately for me, they'll usually give me tea I can't drink, but because I'm lactose intolerant. But you work these. In Ladakh, I learned how to drink butter tea. Yes. And you develop a body language for that also. So butter tea, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, I have to leave now. You've not drunk your tea. Oh, okay. And get up. Because as soon as you have one sip, they pour more in. So those are things you learn through presence, continued presence, sensitivity, observing, talking. If you think participant observation means you'll just observe and hear everything, that's not going to happen. There has to be this conscious bodily thing. Yeah. Yeah, just 2 or 3 more things I want to say about this body language through which you express your own values and judgments. We were talking about signals of boredom, yawning. So all of us have that problem. Even when we are very interested, we may yawn, we may show that, start looking elsewhere, You have to somehow make the people you're with feel you're with them there. So you also have to have stories about if you yawn that, yeah, last night I couldn't sleep because of that jagran around the corner or whatever. You have to, through your body language, not create a distance, through your body language, not put forward your values and judgments, through your body language, not show boredom, but show interest. And 2 or 3 things over here, which I can say again, you don't argue, okay? You're not judgmental. You do not argue back even when you feel provoked. You don't give advice even if it's asked, okay? Now, as I said already, all of this clearly requires more than this flying in and out visit. It requires a presence which they see, you see continuously in the field for some time. Time allows depth, okay? Time allows multiple stories from the same person and different people. If there's time, we can come back to the whole, the Rashomon effect, which is so critical to fieldwork, and where you then don't try and iron everything out into a coherence. You don't try and iron out everything in terms of it just being one story. It's the incoherence, the opposite views which you have to try and find ways to bring together. And I was going to say 2 or 3 more things, but I'll leave it. One was on the question of writing, because you can't do fieldwork without writing from day one. So one is the question of writing, and the other is the question of context. But I'll leave those aside for now and stop at the... We'll see. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I went on very long.
Hello, yeah. Okay. It's a hard act to follow Rajni, and she's perhaps laid out the thing much more clearly than I just want to start with one very anecdote which is written by Bernard Cohn. So Bernard Cohn, was an anthropologist, but also was a major historian also. And in one of his ruminations about the question of what's the distinction between history and anthropology, he used to say historians come with loads of books and things to their class to cite this book, that book. And I used to go with some chits, little chits. And so as a trained anthropologist, he made this as a point, that we don't start with structures or ideas, and we just have little experiences which we try to weave into narrative. And I am in a funny position because I don't have really a structured, but yeah, I am going to use the chit method. the anthropologist's favorite method of trying to reflect on the question of what does method mean, and how do historians do research, and is there a kind of a method at all? In my last lecture I gave at the university, Delhi University, when I retired, I took up the very strange, my own experience as an outsider, as an historian, and I pointed out as the title of the top, my lecture was called, "Is there a method in the madness?" Now historians have some kind of a method, but I have not found what is that method. I'm just telling you, there is no real historical method. Everywhere this whole question of method has come out, I have really found, and I was trained first in physics, so I was much more, I knew a little bit about scientific method, and I found that history is the original messy. If the field is messy, you have to see what history is like. It is a totally messy thing, and it is very difficult to kind of find a way to kind of draw out what could be a method, which is important. For the historian, actually, the only method is either lack of method, that is what I would argue, or a multiplicity of methods, which is a standard thing nowadays to call methods a toolbox. That means we are not attached to one method. We use whatever is appropriate, what do we think, including quantitative, qualitative, whatever. And we shamelessly borrow from different disciplines, knowing their contradictions, knowing their different theoretical foundations, but we are shamelessly kind of following it. So I begin with the idea that is there a method at all in history? And the second question is about, a very important question, is about embodiment and embodied practice, and embodied research practice, embodied research. At first glance, when the way Rajni has pointed out, which is absolutely crucial, and I would fully agree with that, and I will follow up. But at first glance, historians are totally have disembodied presence, because they are never present on the so it is actually a strange experience. And if I would say, if I take Rajni's point, which is absolutely crucial, only thing that matters that we are always have to be embodied in the practice of research. I agree completely with him. I only want to expand it a little bit. The question of embodiment is not mere physical presence. When embodiment is definitely physical presence, it's true, as she said, and that's crucial. I think fieldwork teaches this. Mark Bloch, the famous historian, and he worked on, feudal period, that means 11th, 12th century mostly, but down to the 14th in Europe. Often I used to argue and used to say that the historian needs thicker boots than notebooks, That means they need to kind of really go around the area they're studying rather than sit in the archives alone and do it. And he was very, very crucial, and his methods are very important. He used place names, a lot of things in order to understand. And I would suggest that historians really require a kind of presence, even though it is a disembodied presence or embodiment in a very, very temporally dislocated. So it is the space in which you would be there, but you are not in the time, you are not present. So you are never coevally present. Historians are never coevally present, and we did not see it as a challenge, or as a kind of limitation. In fact, that produces a certain type of possibility. We'll go into that. So let me begin by saying, or let me kind of take it further by saying, and I'm really going to speak for 10 minutes, 7:22. So another 8 minutes, or if I can. So let me put out, like in very short telegraphic way, that the kind of method that I have found in my own experience and research, and I think many historians do like that, but they don't explicitly mention it, is to be surprised by your field, and in a case, the archive. That means if we go with a question which is prefigured, we generally, 99% of the time, don't find it. Rather, the main thing is to be prepared to be surprised. Even though I knew the standard history, historiography, everything about that place or that, of that location or in time of that period, I still must be open to surprise. And that surprise is often the key to the formulation of the problem. Now, I think she mentioned, but she didn't follow it up. How do we come out as a historical problem? Do we know it from before? In advance, as Rajni said, no, we don't never go out in advance. So what is it? How do we theoretically go look at the archives unless we have a research problem? Now, I personally found in my own PhD and in several of my research that I found the research problem at the end of the research. What I was going to find, I had no idea, or had an idea, and it was definitely always turned out something else. That means not only, the thing that drives my research is not the echo from the material. That the material is speaking and telling you, well, this is what you... In fact, exactly, it is the silence. It is in fact a tangent. It is something which I had never expected or didn't expect. Or that often created the driving force for my further research or finding. So there's a, Rajni would know, there was a very famous debate in the 70s, early debate. It's called Positivist Debate in German Sociology. It's called Positive. Very, very brilliant book. This is something which you need to kind of to gaze, where all the positivist methods are discussed by the greatest, all the scientific method and so on. They're very good stuff, all the laws of covering law and all kinds of things, positivist laws. But one essay there by Theodor Adorno has always stuck with me. The way I understood him was that we come to a research, whatever, we never go without any thought. We always have some idea. But it's only at the end of the thing that both the research problem starts moving towards you as you move towards it. So it's often at the end of the research that your kind of a framework, whatever you have done, your basis starts becoming adequate to the material. And the material starts becoming adequate to your research framework. And that's a brilliant kind of insight. Though Adorno didn't do a lot of empirical research, but he was a great theoretician and philosopher. But he understood this exactly what is happening. How do we actually formulate a research problem? We always start off with a fuzzy idea, and then slowly the research problem itself becomes clear at the end of the research as the material starts becoming adequate. The word he used was adequate. That means it kind of molds itself to your queries, and your queries start getting molded by the material. And a kind of a fit, good or bad, emerges at the end of the research. So research problem is a highly kind of overrated concept, that we have to have a research problem. But as I said, that you need to come with some fuzzy idea, but you come out at the end of it that you find. In fact, in my lecture, or if I may just be allowed to cannibalize that lecture and a little bit and show you what I tried to show in my, my own research experiences has been, I looked at three questions. One is called conjuncture, conjecture, and coincidence. That means I shamelessly followed the looking at strange coincidences, strange conjecture, things which I didn't expect but which suddenly turns out together. And the point was that I was either open to it, I don't know whether I was open to it. I only found them in the material sometimes, one line somewhere, which often triggered this. Now this is very famously put out as a theoretical thing by a very famous essay by, what's his name? the very famous microhistorian. He's famous. No. This is anyway. Yeah, historian. He's a very famous microhistorian. No, not Mins. Sorry, it'll come just quickly. Cheese and worms guy. Yeah? Ginsberg, sorry. Thank you. I'm already on the downward slope, you know. How would I forget that? So that essay, which he wrote in 1980, which came out in History Workshop Journal, is actually a must-read for all of you, which is about this possibility of how do you derive inferences? How do you derive from a fact inference? And he went up to the idea of looking at, again, to question of embodied presence, that how do we derive? So he took the example of the tracker, the guy who tracks so what is he looking at? He's looking at traces kept by, say, a vanishing animal. This is the hunters who was tracking an animal. So from a paw mark or a trace, they try to imagine the trajectory of that person, of that. So they embody, through a trace, they embody the object of the search. So, but how do they jump from this paw mark to a tiger who's limp, who's, as you know, the famous stories of Arthur Conan Doyle, a Hound of Baskervilles. So how do you know this from the dog that did not bark, not from the dog's bark, but the absence of his barking, the anomalous situation, the thing that doesn't really fit in, and it is from this that he derives. Now, I pointed out that 3 types of methods which exist. One is inductive method, which is generalization, and deductive method, which is to come down to the particular. But the method which is now becoming very, or the way actually I think most historians do, is to jump to a kind of jump over a gap which exists between a fact which is this, and the inference. And that's a method of what is called in Persian language semiotics, abduction. Neither induction nor deduction, but abduction. We have to make that leap beyond the gap which exists between a fact, a sentence, a feeling, something which you heard, and the conclusions that you might have to. We have to make that leap. We have to make that leap. It may be a wrong leap, and it may be a right leap, but we must understand that there is a gap which exists between whatever you might have. We have this idea that if I'm standing there, I am in presence. We are actually always absent. Always absent, even in face-to-face. I'm saying, I don't want to lapse into the ontological, epistemological question, but I think, and this absence is crucial for us. It allows us to jump in a way, not jump to conclusions. And I like 2 of these points, 3 points she has made, and I want to reiterate that one way of putting is that we see something in the material and we quickly jump to a kind of a framework within which to, that's exactly what she said, interrupting the flow of the archive. You know, the archive has something, it's messy language, and you are trying to push, and you immediately push. So I'll give you an example, just an example that I also did some kind of a ethno study, let's say, ethnographic study, and I took a lot of photographs and all about a particular strike which was happening in a Delhi industrial area. And I was in a place and listening to one brilliant historian. His name was Alf Lutke. If you would ever read, you should read his stuff. Alf Lutke is a fantastic historian who's dead now, but that time he was alive. And I was trying to show this strike, photos of the strike, and I was trying to explain, you know. And I remember what he said. He said, stop, just wait for this this material to flow back into you. Don't interrupt it through your conclusions. Now that requires listening, but in a very different way, or seeing, or hearing, or smelling. Don't interrupt. Don't interrupt. And that's absolutely, absolutely crucial as a method. Same with what Rajni said in terms of, is that we should not interrupt, not because it's some kind of, there is of course important what she said, that you have to give, it is their story, but the point she made that we are continuously co-producing the story, all right? And if we are co-producing and we need to be in conversation and we're getting this, we should be aware that we are not merely immediately fact-checking them, It is in their absence, in their mistakes, in their silence. And this is a very famous thing in oral history. Very famous studies of oral history which have shown us this particular thing, that listening to mistakes and becoming aware of mistakes often tells you far more about the subjective world than factual statements. So in interviews where they merely reiterate what you already know, where you justified in asking, and saying that, well, this happened here, is not the most interesting interview. The most interesting interview is where you are listening to the lapses of memory, the way they often change the thing. As she said, they might change their views or their stories over time, and being aware of that. And there's mistakes, often so-called mistakes, anomaly produces the much stronger, a much richer notion of the subjective self or the kind of life world or things like that. So I'll just end here. It's very, very tough to kind of really put it down as a method. As I said, I have no method. I have nothing really to teach you about method. I've found all my studies, everything often totally out of sync, out of tune. It might look as I've structured it very well, but actually all of them are purely by chance many times. Many times I found this material by chance, and I've given examples in my own study from early study of agrarian history of Chota Nagpur of Jharkhand, which I did my PhD. My main thesis came out from a completely misreading of the data of rainfall data. The thing which I was looking for was how rainfalls are affecting, the prices, and rainfalls are affecting harvest and all. And I found a kind of misleading, completely off the trend data, and that became the basis of my whole thesis, which showed kind of a counterintuitively I followed it. Same thing when I studied areas in which I looked at Muharram, Tazia, Muharram in a place. I'll just finish here, 2 minutes. In Trinidad, I studied this particular, and there again I found it was a completely off thing by which class conflict and community identity were merged, which was never seen in together, but it turned because of a particular coincidence which happened because of the way in which Muharram in everywhere returns to every year 11 days earlier, okay? So it took 30 years for it to return to a thing which I call a strike season, at a particular time of thing when strikes used to happen. And that coincidence allowed for a huge transition or huge charge of both class conflict or community conflict and all to happen. So to notice these things were totally by chance that I often found these records and all. And there are several other, all my major studies always had come out of anomaly rather than from actual matching of the material with my framework. And I would say surprise, by chance, be open to surprise, be open to change, don't interrupt, I reiterate, and always be accepting that I only wanted to expand what this notion of embodiment means. Can you be embodied in the past? So one way of questioning that is to say, you are never embodied even in the present, okay? You are never indifferent. There is always a gap, as I was saying. But I also want to expand the notion of embodiment, which would allow you to understand this absent present in a strong manner. Thank you.
We have Professor Shivani now.
Thank you. So it just became a harder act to follow. So what I'll do is something different. I also know I'm the last speaker of the day, so I'll try and entertain you as much as possible. So I'm going to very literally respond to the question posed by Bhavneet, which is, how do you approach embodied research from your disciplinary or epistemic positions? And I'm going to do that by talking from my own fieldwork and my own experience. And so let me actually begin by detailing what are the epistemic or disciplinary positions that I am speaking from or that I'm responding to when I'm in the field. I'm primarily trained in political science, and political science comes with its, I'm hoping there are some political scientists in the room. So this discipline comes with its own set of questions, its own way of framing, its own way of looking at the world. It sometimes asks, in this world of interdisciplinarity, each discipline does continue to ask very specific kinds of questions, even if they are asking questions about the same subject area. So I study caste, and almost every discipline, from political science to sociology to economics to psychology, asks questions about caste, but it asks different kinds of questions, right? And so so political science as a disciplinary training, when I do my research, largely frames the questions that I'm asking. It also frames, it gives me a list of texts that I should compulsorily refer to because I need to speak to my discipline. It also gives me a set of methods that I follow, right? And political science, although I agree with Professor Mohapatra that like history, political science doesn't seem to any longer have very distinct methods, but it does cling to some methods, field work, which is distinct from ethnography, case study method. A lot of political science, especially outside India, is now moving to quantitative analysis. And those remain distinct methods that the field uses. So I'm, of course, trained in these ideas, in these methods, influenced by these methods. Now, the question that I was asking in the large part of the work that I do, the question that I was asking was, how is it that caste is reproduced and experienced and negotiated and renegotiated in and through everyday experiences of objects. So it was objects that fascinated me. In particular, I narrowed down my concentration on leather. And there's a reason why, and we can go over that in the discussion. And I was looking for ways in which I can operationalize the experience of caste through leather. And it was turning out to be very, very difficult because political economy was one route to take, right? But that route had been taken too many times. We have too many sort of studies of, the plight of leather workers, their bad working conditions, that they're not paid, that they are discriminated by caste, and so on and so forth, right? And so, because of the question that I was asking, and largely the question of caste is also studied in too many different ways across disciplines, right? We still don't know enough about caste, but the question is asked almost regularly in academic research, right? And so because I was asking a question that is often asked, and because if I'd applied standard methods that political science offers me, I would get the results which are already there, right? So I would replicate the study that, it's, something really bad's happening with the leather workers, caste-wise, in terms of economics, in terms of labor, and all of that. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to come up, as all of you do, with new questions, new answers, if not new questions, right? And it's entirely possible to ask an age-old question, but come up with new answers. And so what I did was, again through a process, it didn't happen naturally, but what I did was I decided to shift my methods. And I said, okay, what would happen if I start thinking of leather not as an object, not just as an object that is being produced and manufactured and sold and so on and so forth, but also as an object that is experienced, that is sensed, right? And the moment I say leather, we know that we are thinking of the smell of leather. And I had material with me, written material, archival material, which talked about the smell of leather. And I thought, okay, how do I operationalize this now, right? And this is where I had to become, compulsorily had to become interdisciplinary, because political science doesn't give me methods or methodologies to study senses, right? But anthropology does, sociology does, and there is a wealth of literature that these two disciplines have produced in studying the senses, right? And so I, epistemologically or disciplinarily, I stay rooted in political science. My questions come from political science. My texts, a lot of them come from political science. But I borrow my methods from sensory anthropology or anthropology of the senses, right? And so it was, just the contingencies of my field and of the question that I was asking or the answers that I wanted forced me to become interdisciplinary, right? But interdisciplinary still rooted in a particular discipline, and I think that's very, very important to understand. So I never, in my writing or speaking, I never actually say that I did ethnography, because I did not. I'm not trained in ethnography. Ethnography, everybody now seems to say we do ethnography, but the sociologists in the room know, anthropologists in the room know that it's a very specific method of studying the field. So what I usually say is that I borrowed from some ethnographic methods, right? But largely what I did was, a political science like fieldwork, which was informed by certain sort of sensory ethnographic methods, right? Now, this was the larger sort of where I come from, what's my discipline, and how that impacted the research that I did. But the big question about embodiment is something that continues to trouble me, and looking at some of the topics that all of you have been presenting on or will present tomorrow, I think those questions of embodiment should also affect you and trouble you in your field. And the big question of embodiment for me was that I am studying a discourse or a system, which is caste, in which I am implicated as well. So I am not studying my own caste group. I am studying a different caste group from mine, but different in what sense? Different in the sense that I'm studying a caste group which faces the brunt of the caste discourse, which faces utter violence, humiliation, discrimination at the hands of a discourse or a system or a practice which benefits me, right? And I cannot, and those of you who study caste know that we've begun talking about passing in caste or caste passing, right? Because of who we are as researchers, our names, and this has been talked about before, our names, the way we dress, the way we talk, the languages we speak, the dialects or the intonation of the languages we speak, what we eat, what we don't eat, gives away our caste, right? And passing is very, very difficult, right? And there's also that big ethical question of what do you do about your caste and also other identities, but I know about caste, so I'll speak about that. What do you do about your caste as a researcher when you are also studying caste? That's one. Second, in this particular case, because I was studying the senses and I was going around asking my respondents, how does the tannery smell to you, right? The big question facing back at me was, how do you smell the tannery, right? It's not as if I'll shut my senses while going to the field. And because I'm asking a question of sensory experience, of affect, of emotion, I am also a participant in that field, right? And so the nature of the questions you ask will determine the kind of embodiment you have in the field. It may be less, it may be more, but it will never go away, right? And we probably don't have science or science researchers in this room, but if there were, this equally applies to them, right? They may be doing a lab-based research, but the sense of embodiment is still present, right? So let us first make that clear that we are always, and as has been said before, we are always embodied as researchers. It could be embodiments in different ways. So for me, embodiment was, of course, me as a person. And what do I do about a researcher's body and self, which is so obviously upper caste, right? Which is so obviously, I also researched in 2 big cities, one of which is my hometown, the other is not. So when I'm researching in my hometown, my various bouquet of identities is also readable from my address, from my parents' name, from how I traveled to my field, and so on, and my speech, of course, right? And so embodiment for me was, of course, physical, very much so. It's a question of self in the field. It was also a question of my respondents and their embodiment and their bouquet of identities, which they brought in. And more importantly, which I realized much later, not during my PhD. This third thing I realized way, way later, is that embodiment also should appear in all our works through the texts that we are referring to, through the writing and the kind of writing that we are doing, right? And we talk a lot about decolonizing the syllabus and so on and so forth. But to put it in practice and say, okay, so I can do nothing much about my caste, gender, religious identities when I go to the field. I carry them with me. I can put them on the table. I can be conscious of them. I can bring them into my analysis. But beyond that, what do I do? One thing that I do is make sure that the people I'm reading, who are a very important part of the analysis you do and the argument you make, the people that I'm reading are also embodied in diverse contexts and diverse identities and diverse ways, right? So look at your reading lists. Look at the embodiment of your writing. Are you writing as an upper caste person? And I frequently do, still do, right? And I have to constantly check myself, right? It's a simple thing of, are you constantly saying they feel or they live like that or they do something, right? Are you othering through your readings? Are you only referring to upper caste scholars? Are you only sort of referring to scholars from the global north, and so on and so forth, right? So those are the 3 big ways in which embodiment appeared in my research. And what can we do about it, right? And here, I think what has happened in the last 10, 15 years is that who the researcher is has changed radically. So we are finally sort of seeing, what Anne Philip would call a sort of quantum of researchers who are also coming from diverse locations. So reservations, decades of reservations and affirmative actions, especially in educational institutions, we are seeing the results of that now. We are seeing the results of OBC reservations very centrally, which is fundamentally changing who the researcher is. So our earlier notions of embodiment and objectivity and subjectivity and fieldwork, which said that I'm studying the other as a researcher and thus I occupy a certain position vis-a-vis power, that question is not that linear anymore. So we have researchers studying up and studying down. We have researchers studying their own communities. We have researchers doing autoethnography, right? We have researchers looking into their own family histories. right? We have researchers studying wildly different contexts from where they come from, right? And so our older ideas of of comportment in the field, what we should say, what we should not say, how we should present in the field, have to also undergo a radical shift, right? And in that process, it's not always very easy to say, or very convenient to actually say, either I'll distance myself from the field, or that I'll completely immerse myself in the field, right? And I'll just give you two examples from my own fieldwork, which constantly kept coming back to me, and I still don't have easy answers for that. One was a question of food and sharing food, right? And Professor Palriwala has talked about water, and water continues to be a very contentious issue in the field. But for me, it was food, and I'll tell you why, because most of my fieldwork happened in industrial areas, where tanneries or leather factories were located. In North India, this entire field is almost masculine, almost male actually, not masculine, almost male, right? So I was mostly, on most days of my fieldwork, I was the only woman in a factory or a tannery full of men in an area which is an industrial area, which is largely full of men, right? I was also working with my respondents who were of the same caste as me or similar caste as me, who occupied, positions like the manager or the owner. There were people who were from different caste groups than me, higher and lower, who occupied positions of the worker or manager or owner. I was also working with people who were from a different religion than me. A lot of tannery owners, for instance, are upper caste Muslims in UP, right? Now, when I'm spending the day with them, I have to eat, and I'm frequently meeting them during lunchtime or tea breaks, or while they're going home or coming from home and things like that. And very frequently, food was offered to me. And also the time period of the research is interesting. I started doing this research in 2014, when the context of UP, the political, social context of UP was changing drastically, right? And so I'm an outsider. I'm also a suspect outsider. And giving food was one way to check what I'll eat, what I'll not eat, who I'll eat with, who I'll not eat with. But here and this every researcher undergoes, but here lies the problem, which is that I am, and I continue to be someone who prefers eating vegetarian food. This is also a statement I have evolved through years of fieldwork, right? I cannot any longer say I'm a vegetarian and not qualify it because of the times we live in, right? And so I usually say I prefer eating vegetarian food, not for religious reasons, not for caste reasons, but it's just a preference I've evolved over the years for various other factors and so on and so forth. A lot of food offered to me, surprisingly, was meat. Yeah, because I'm meeting someone over lunch, they open their tiffin box and they say, have. I can have. I don't have a restriction that I can't partake in the meat in their tiffin box, and I did eat it, right? But I can't eat a full-fledged meal of meat, right? So at times I had to say, I'll start with you, I'll taste a little, but that's about it, right? Immediate layer of suspicion, which the only way I found it easy to, I found I could counter it was what Professor said earlier, which is repeated visits, right? So every time I go and I tell something about myself, or I ask a question, or I eat a little more with them, things began to change, right? So that was one. And so this is a very interesting case where I could have, quote unquote, passed and said, I'll eat, right? Or I could have said, the other question which came to me repeatedly is, how do you smell the tannery? So these are people sitting in the tannery, who work in the tannery. I'm talking to them there about their sensory experiences of this work. And every once in a while, somebody will turn back and say, but aapko kaisa lag raha hai? how are you feeling sitting here? You know, aren't you uncomfortable sitting here? Now again, there were two ways I could pass that. I could pass my caste, gender, religious identity and say, nahi, it's sab theek hai, everything is okay. It's not smelling like anything, or it's smelling neutral or whatever. That could be one way in which, you know, researchers can distance themselves, right? But I couldn't because of the very nature of the inquiry that I was doing. And so, you know, I found it interesting to do, to sort of do what, you know, Edmund Husserl, one great sort of philosopher, had said, describe things as they are. Right, very simple advice, describe things as they are. And so I often end up saying it smells really bad, right? So sort of a different take from what Professor Palriwala said, where she said, don't give advice, don't give your personal opinion. But here is a field where, you know, saying, oh, it doesn't smell like anything to me, where it actually objectively smells bad because we are sitting amongst rotting hides and animal remains. What is the ethical stance that you will take? Will you sort of distance yourself from your field and the field's embodiment and your embodiment and say, everything's hunky-dory, I don't smell anything? Or are you actually going to say it does smell bad or it doesn't smell anything, whatever is the case, and let that open up a conversation where your respondents then don't feel the burden to also perform that they are sitting in a neutral smelling or politically neutral or neutral tasting, whatever you are researching, that they're also not sitting in a neutral field, right? And I'll end by saying that this very complicated process of fieldwork made me realize something that should have been told to us at the beginning of our fieldwork or in our method courses, is that the field and the researcher perform embodiment equally. So as we are performing, being the researcher, coming with our theories and our ideas and performing our caste, religious, gender identities, the field also performs. They are also not telling you absolute truths, or they are also not sort of being their absolute true selves, because that's an unfair request. That's an unfair ask. Right? If I shove the mic in your face, you will not really tell me exactly what you're thinking or what your past history is. So embodiment is performed in multiple ways in the field, right? And being conscious of it, putting it out on the table, is the one strategy I found useful. Leads to complications, but those are the complications that I'd prefer. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This panel has officially crossed all time limit. We have no time for Q&A, but maybe for 10 minutes, if we can just take some questions, because there are a lot of. Yeah, we started. Yes. Yeah. So okay. So can we have like a quick round of comments?
Hi, I'm Asmita. Thank you to the wonderful panelists. My question to you is to you, Shivani. I am still in my preliminary readings of caste, and since coming from an economics background, caste is always come up in readings as a context. Certain economists think about how gender crosscuts all the social hierarchies, including caste, and also Marxist literatures talk about how class struggles supersedes caste struggles. So in these realities, my question is, how do we make sense, or how do we navigate these multiple identities while studying caste or gender or one of these identity?
Yeah, we'll take a round of questions. Yeah. Gayatri, can you also introduce yourselves?
I'm Gayatri. I teach. I'm a faculty here at Ideas. My question is, regarding this social distancing and transgressing of social distancing, which both Professor Rajni and Professor Shivani talked about. In our discussion, so I feel the transgressing is also available when you are in probably a privileged position as compared to the site of your research. You can choose to drink tea or not tea, but if you're a researcher who would be asked to get out of the house when your second name is known, there is no transgressing of social distancing, right? Also, if you're a Muslim in this country now, what are the field sites available to you, and particularly if you carry markers of religion? That comes to my very practical question where we started from, identifying research problem, field site, field visit, etc. I think students are also making very practical choices based on these kinds of questions as well, which may not be a very strictly academic choice. I would just like to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Sachin. Since we are talking about ethnography as this very particular, concrete, specific thing, I might as well give my example of, like, I'm doing PhD on caste passing, Dalits passing as upper caste, and in my field, like, I found it very difficult to do this sort of following my research participants throughout their journeys, throughout their life, because they have their private lives, and I could only interview them like when they're not, in their acting as, yeah. But some of them I could follow them through, because since like some of them had a public life, so to say, and how they pass off in that public life. So my question was like, how much of an autoethnographic part can be used as a complementary to this sort of research? Yeah. And not as a standalone autoethnographic research. Yeah.
In a certain sense, a response to many of these questions over here, as well as to what was said here. Sorry, I'm just forgetting that I have to hold the mic. Madan, T.N. Madan, made this wonderful line, because anthropology moved from when you studied the other to when we tended to study societies within India. We tended to study ourselves. And so then what happens when you study yourself? If you do an autoethnography, for example, by itself. That was the question. And he said, anthropologists have learned to live intimately with strangers and strangely with intimates. And the point about this was, how do you see what you take, what is given, your assumptions? How do you go beyond that? And when you do autoethnography, one reason you've come to is that there's a question which has pushed you to think how this life is strange, my life is strange. Sometimes actually we push researchers to do autoethnography because they are someone who are trying to pass from upper caste to lower caste in the field, and as they talk about it, there is a lot more which emerges from there. But the problem, of course, is always, as you said, it cannot be only that. It has to be more than, I think there are wonderful autoethnographies which are standalone. And then it still goes along with a lot of other stuff. There are also, of course, wonderful ethnographies which are about single people. Again, that's another whole debate and question. So in terms of this question of transgression, it relates directly to your question also of passing, okay? And to your question of intersections. I'm not going to really address your question because that's really, in a sense, more a theoretical, conceptual thing than looking at the process of fieldwork, other than in the way these might come in. But one of the things is that your presence is never absent. Go to quantum physics, Prabhu. The presence is always there. And the problem is that most of us we are not recognizing it. We are doing partial autoethnographies without making it explicit. And I'm not trying to suggest we then go with this whole thing of, okay, first just position yourself. You can position yourself, I'm of so-and-so caste and so-and-so class and so-and-so education, and just go along without having questioned any of your assumptions. And I think what we had Shivani trying to suggest is that even when you do that, you actually are having to be very self-reflexive, very questioning, and bring that implicit autoethnography out. You have to live strangely with yourself also. That is, in a sense, the thing. And I just want to add one thing to what he was saying, because I didn't manage to. Serendipity. I think absolutely, serendipity is so important in terms of what you find, the shocks you get in the field, the way you move. And your autoethnography will become serendipitous along with others' stories.
Well, I just have, I think, questions for you, Oliver, because I just take up this question. It's very, very interesting that she mentioned quantum physics. The point is, it's you know about one aspect of the quantum physics, that the observer changes the observation. That's very well known, Heisenberg's thing. But there's another thing of Schrödinger, who is also, which is about the object vanishes. Moment you watch it, it vanishes. The cat vanishes. So we are actually, I didn't want to say that we are never, I'd say we are present, but we are absent. Even in a face-to-face, we are absent. In so far as we are always present in some form, even when we are absent, totally absent, in a way we are thinking of like historical points. So this play between presence and absence is crucial. That's why, because I wanted to say that both, all of us, actually we study human society and all, that's important. But what about non-humans? What happens to their presence? What is their presence? There's such a, absolutely, not just animals. Just now Jane Goodall has just died, 2 days back. And she was criticized so much for anthropomorphism, but now we know that it was absolutely crucial the way she brought out, and even though criticized. But I'm saying there is also the non-human, not only in terms of animals, but like infrastructures. If we're actually looking at objects, as you were saying, we are in presence of objects who do not have the same subjective consciousness or subjective presence. And we still need to do that. We need to interrogate them as they appear. That's a classic thing. Even though we appear to be studying human beings, we actually forget that they have been commoditized in a massive way. Labor especially. It's as commodity form, it is embodiment of, on the one hand, pure abstracted from it, all its specificity, particularity, as comes out as this, and yet we study them and understand that this is possible to study labor only because it has its own characteristic, it is an individual, it has something beyond. So the key question is, so same with caste, same with all of these studies we do, is to be aware of this double thing, double presence, and presence, absence, as well as. So that's why one of the things she mentioned, and which Shivani mentioned, and I don't think Rajni has directly said, but I think we all had to face, is this massive thing of so-called decolonization. And I want to say it as a methodology, it is a completely bogus bullshit methodology which has come up. I feel it is kind of like sweeping through various research, like, like a creepy poisonous vein. It is strangling questions. It's made it, it has become like, over determines our questions. We should make a certain distance from it in order to study anything, Really cannot allow it to strangle us at all. In terms of historians' research, I can very 100% say that, because we have fought for a long time against colonialism. Our historiography emerged. And the point about this decolonizing movement is it's precisely its otherness from actual decolonization. This gap between the real decolonization, political movement of decolonization, and this ethereal notion of as if it's a Christian idea of something, as if it's an error of mind, which you can take out the error and things will, we have to kind of continuously stuck to get the error out of our head. I believe, and please be, I'm sorry, I don't want to, as I said, we should be advising you, but I must say, be careful, be totally careful of this decolonizing miasma. And I'm just saying, I'm sure that my colleagues have understood this peculiar moment we are living, in which, in the name of decolonization, now we are being colonized massively, not some white colonization. Now, really, that thing which we need, it's a brown colonization we are experiencing, and we are kind of, institutions have gone. And anyway, thanks. Sorry to be so rudely here, but I really don't feel it has any. The rules?
Goodness with colleagues and co-evals are great.
Okay, thank you for those questions, and they're difficult questions, and I do not have direct answers for those questions. So, what if a researcher is asked to leave for whatever identity or reason? What if it's not possible to meet respondents again and again, or follow them? Or the question of how do we which identity to take? One sort of simpler way to look at it is that neither as researchers nor our respondents carry only one identity. So we are always sort of picking and choosing from a hybridity of identities to say, okay, today or in this field I will foreground this one and keep at the back some other identity, right? Same for our respondents. We might approach them because they are a woman, or we might approach them because they become our respondent because they belong to a particular caste or religion, but they do carry other identities. So one possible way to think about this is when direct research is not possible. So I can't either research on the identity that I want to, or I can't carry my own identity into the field. It would be to, I would say, go to a different kind of research method, right? Literature, autoethnography, distance ethnography, digital fieldwork. Feminists are now saying dispersed ethnography, where you can't do it in a sustained manner because of various reasons. So that's one. Second, play with the question of identity, right? So you're not just a Muslim researcher going into the field. You could be a Muslim woman. You could be a queer Muslim woman. See if some other identity helps you navigate the field, prioritizing some other identity, not invisibilizing one identity, but prioritizing or foregrounding something else in your participants or you, helps you at least enter the field, helps us enter the field, and then make space for some sort of negotiation to happen. And very often, I've also told my students, sometimes asking a lateral question really helps. So I want to study A, but I can't ask the question about A for various reasons, right? So I ask C, and I either make my way to A, or I ask C, but I use literature, archives, literary works, media, digital space, whatever, to supplement and complement and reach A in my analysis, not so much my field work. That's also entirely possible. Yeah? But I do not have answers to very difficult questions you're asking.
So I think we will close the session here. And are there questions on your side? Venue reasons. We can be outside and have the conversation. But when I think Nayan and I planned this session, we did not anticipate this vast fleshing out of the idea of embodiment, which ranged from good listening to surprise and serendipity, and to sensory anthropology or the work of the senses. So I think it's just extraordinarily enriching for all of us to hear this session. So thank you so much. And now we're going to do the thing of honoring you and stuff.